Hi guys, MrRoflWaffles here. I have exactly 1 hour, actually slightly less than, to make this video, upload it, and get it all out because there's something in the Blood of the Dead intro cutscene that I don't think enough people are talking about. And I think it's something that once some noise is made, once I post this video, once people start sort of wrapping their heads around this idea, it's gonna end up everywhere because it's a really big deal for not only the map itself, Blood of the Dead, but also just the future of the Ether storyline, really. So, without further ado, we're going to get into it. The format of this video is going to be split into an initial section which is really important, even if you're a zombie storyline buff. Please watch through this first bit, because I'm going to be going back through Black Ops 2 and Black Ops 3, talking about some of the events leading up to Blood, and giving you a really solid foundation in all of the key moments that then change once Blood happens, okay? It's really important that you've got a clear idea of that in your head, because when things then become different, we have to look at the contrast and say, okay, how is this going to change our future from here on? To start with, we're going to go all the way back to Origins. Jason Blundell's second map, he's just done Mob of the Dead, Origins comes out, Primus fight alongside, well, they sort of help out Samantha to free her from Agartha. In that map, Richtofen lobotomizes Maxis and sends his brain inside a drone into Agartha. That brain ends up in the house with Dr. Monty. So, first things first, Maxis has been saved, he's in the house. The Origins Easter egg ends, Primus ends up getting teleported away from that dimension to the original dimension that we're familiar with from the Ultimus storyline. Richtofen goes on a 2-year quest, and we'll get into that in a moment, while the other characters just kind of mill around for a bit, and we don't really know what they actually did. So, Richtofen's journey. He goes to the house and reunites with Maxis, which is no doubt going to be happy days for him because he just cut the guy's brain out, and now he's alive again. Great, thanks Monty. Maxis tells Richtofen what needs to happen if they're going to put things right, and Richtofen acts on it pretty much straight away. First of all, he goes to Alcatraz and convinces the Illuminati that they need to build a laboratory underneath the facility. He also talks to Stanley Ferguson in that time and convinces him that the lab needs to be there, and so Ferguson helps out with its development alongside the Illuminati. He then goes back to the house, he communicates with Stuhlinger, who's part of the Victus crew, and so that begins, despite the fact that that is then sort of forward in time from where we traditionally kind of think of things. Once that communication is all finished, he goes back to Alcatraz and meets the Victus crew who have just arrived from their journey that he has directed them on. Once they get there, they give him the Chronorium, he reads the Chronorium, and finds out about the blood vials. Now, amongst all of that communication, he was also communicating for himself to be given the blood vials, which is one of our many paradoxes at this point. Once he's read the Chronorium, Richtofen steps through a rift and visits Sal and Finn. He takes their blood and then goes to a point in time where he himself is just lying there in bed, doing nothing, and suddenly out of a portal pops himself, and he gives himself the blood vials saying, "It will protect you." So far, this is all stuff that we're really familiar with. Now, he also tells Undead Richtofen to pursue Victus, which has actually already just happened, but he tells Undead Richtofen to do that so that he can secure the blood vials of the Victus crew, and then he goes and gets that blood, and then returns back to Alcatraz. Victus go in the freezers, all is well. Then Primus arrives. This is described in the comic, and I'm going to be making multiple videos about this one little event because it's so interesting, but for now, we'll talk a little bit about Primus's journey in a moment, but for now, we'll just say that they collect the blood vials and leave. Richtofen, however, is still very early on his journey, and so he goes to Morgue City and grabs the summoning key from the Keeper. Nero, Jack, Jessica, and Floyd have all been fighting off the Shadow Man, who they unleashed because they did the rituals, and he ends up getting placed inside the key as well. Richtofen goes from there to Dimension 2210 and secures an innocent Richtofen soul. This is not what you see happening in the giant intro. A lot of people thought it was for a long time, but he actually gets the innocent Richtofen soul from elsewhere. He delivers the innocent Richtofen soul to the house. Then we have the events of the giant. Richtofen steps out of the teleporter, sees Ultimus Richtofen, kills him, causes a load of fractures. Bad news. Quick stock check at this point. In the house, you've got Maxis, and you've got young Richtofen's soul, which has also been sent to the house. You also have Samantha, who has been freed from being trapped in Agartha, which happened in Origins, and is also in the house too. Next up, Der Eisendrache. Dempsey's soul gets saved, gets placed inside the summoning key. Quick stock check, who's in the summoning key right now? Shadow Man, who is in there, and I was saying that all through Black Ops 3, no one believed me. The Shadow Man is in the key, as is Dempsey. Next up, Zetsubo. Takio's soul gets placed inside the key, all good. And then they go on their quick zip. And so now we're jumping back to the point in time that I talked about a minute ago, where the Primus crew from Zetsubou arrive back in the lab to collect the blood vials. For now, we're going to keep going on the regular arc of history that we are familiar with. They collect the blood vials and they leave. Richtofen then, from there, from that point in time that we already talked about, goes off, goes to Morg City, etc. That's all fine, we've talked about that, that's in the past now. Primus in their current day, having just returned from Zetsubou, end up then going onwards to Gorod Krovi. In Gorod, they free Sophia, key point, and they get Nikolai's soul. They then beam those souls up to the house, and you end up with all of the kids uniting collectively together inside the house. Kids. It's at this point that Monty first speaks to the characters. He hasn't done this before, but he says, "Hi, I'm Dr. Monty. Hello, so nice to introduce myself, etc." And then after all of that's happened, Primus themselves go to the house. They bring the summoning key with them, the Shadow Man is inside, Maxis releases him because they left it on a bleeping table. The events of Revelations happens, and Richtofen says multiple times, "This is not the future that I sought to secure. Something has clearly gone wrong." And it's unclear whether he's just saying that for the benefit of Dr. Monty, or if he really is surprised that things have ended up exactly that way. Once we get to the end of Revelations, the Shadow Man obviously gets zapped by Sophia, really epic moment that lasts about 10 seconds. And then, and I'm going to quote the timeline here, with the Shadow Man and the Apothicons vanquished, Monty discovers that Primus has consumed the blood of souls from dimensions that no longer exist. The paradox must be resolved. We then loop back to the beginning of the timelines, the different universes, January 15th, 1292, which happens to be a 115 day, and that's the end of the Primus arc, with the Great War between humanity and the Apothicons beginning. So that's all good. The characters then unite for the first time in Origins, except really they're reuniting, because Primus have been through this loop before. They unite in Origins, they help Samantha, they end up sending Maxis to the house, they go on to this other universe, and all the events that I talked about at the start of this video happen again. Let's fast forward again then to the Alcatraz laboratory, and this is where I want you to hold on to a solid object and just get ready for the timey-wimey implications of what the hell they are doing here, okay? When we get to that Alcatraz lab scene, there are kind of two timelines ongoing. One of them is the timeline of Richtofen. Richtofen as a character is kind of distinct from the group of Primus because this Richtofen does all this stuff in the lab before he even goes to Morg City and then later reunites with Primus in the Giant, okay? So we will treat these timelines as separate, but they converge at this point. A confluence, if you will. Let's do another stock check of where we're at in both those separate timelines at this converging point in history. For Richtofen, he is yet to go to Morg City. He is yet to collect his own soul. He's yet to even get the summoning key. He hasn't really done anything apart from freeing Samantha in Origins, so Samantha is in the house, going forward and getting the Chronorium from Victus, and so Victus have gone on their path from the comic and ended up in the freezers. He's read the Chronorium, and that's basically where his little arc is currently at. On the other side of things, the other side of the aisle, you've got the Primus timeline. And the timeline for Primus, though, is very different. For them, once they get to that Alcatraz scene, their Richtofen has gone onwards from the point that the other Richtofen is just embarking and secured the summoning key. He's got the Shadow Man in that summoning key. He's also used the summoning key to save a soul of his from Dimension 2210 and send it to the house. He's then also got Dempsey's soul and he's got Takio's soul. So this summoning key arriving at the house at the point at which the other Richtofen leaves in order to set up those events has 3 souls in it. The Shadow Man, Dempsey, and Takio. With all of that clear, we can now begin to break down what's actually happening in the Blood intro. One of the first things that I want to talk about is the fact that in the Blood intro, there are 2 Richtofens, just like we expect. One has the blood vials, which is again what we expect, but the other does not. Now, if it was a post-Revelations Richtofen, you'd assume that he might have 1 blood vial, because they drink 1, and then, as you'll see, for example, in the Rev ending, they still do have some blood ready to use for whatever they want. Now, you could argue, if it's a post-Revelations Richtofen, that he might have then used the other blood vial for some kind of purpose, and then come back to this point in time at Alcatraz. That is possible. But A key point that I really want to stress is that it's also possible that if, when he goes back in time to give himself the blood vials, that does not cause the blood vials to magically appear on his person, which, by the way the cycle has worked in the past, I would assume that it does not, we could therefore assume that it's also an early version of Richtofen. Because yes, he's gone back in time to give himself those blood vials, but that's a different Richtofen. That's not him. That's another universe Richtofen who doesn't have the blood yet. And at some point, there had to be a scenario where Richtofen originally went and got the blood vials, gave it to himself, and then from there on, all the other Richtofens ended up with the blood being given to them by that original Richtofen. So it could be that original Richtofen as well. Regardless though, we've got two options for Richtofen, post-Rev and very, very early, and then we've also got Primus just doing their thing. Now, Primus get there, but they get there in the wrong place. They say that they should have been closer to the lab, they end up being late as well, and when they arrive, Richtofen says the sorts of things that you sort of expect him to say, but in a manner that kind of conveys a little bit of worry, a little bit of concern. It's clear that something is wrong. He hands Primus Richtofen the Chronorium, he takes a read of it, despite the fact that he has already read it, and he finds out that things have changed. Now, at this point, what we would expect to happen from here is that the Richtofen that hands Richtofen the Chronorium would go through the portal, he'd end up going to Morgue City, he'd get the Shadow Man in the summoning key, he'd go on and secure one of his own innocent souls, etc. But we now don't know if the Richtofen that we see go through the portal is off to do that, because that would be an early Richtofen, or if he's already done that, come back again much later, and it's Revelations Richtofen, and he's killed the original Richtofen or something and altered history in some way. Regardless though, that is a can of worms that I want to talk about in another video, because this is already complex enough as it is. The key point I want to make is that Primus, seeing this change in history, get really worried, right? We know that they only make a quick trip to the prison that doesn't involve all these eventualities when they go from Zetsubou to Alcatraz to Zetsubou in the arc that I previously discussed. As such, we get to a point where the stock check for Blood of the Dead is an intriguing one to say the least, because Richtofen's soul may or may not be in the house. Samantha and Maxis are, but Richtofen's soul may or may not be. My assumption is that Richtofen is in the house because that Richtofen in Primus would have done that in his arc of things. So let's, for the sake of argument, say that Samantha, Maxis, and Richtofen are all fine in the house. Let's also say, for the sake of argument, that Richtofen in the Primus group, not on the other side, but in the Primus group, he managed to grab the summoning key, for example, because that's necessary for the events that he has experienced in his history. He's got the Shadow Man in there, and he also, by the time they get to Zetsubou, has Dempsey's soul in the key and Takio's soul in the key. At that point, Nikolai's soul has not been collected. It's not there. Sophia has not been freed. She is trapped in Gorod. Where does this lead? Well, it leads to a scenario where we suddenly, via some unknown chain of events, whether it's an influence of Dr. Monty or this early or late Richtofen, we somehow have ended up in a scenario where the events at the end of Black Ops 3 have been snipped off. The loop that was previously like this has a little hole in it now, and it's unfurled into a flat timeline, essentially, where there's a load of wiggly stuff happening over and over and over again, but then there's an out, and Nikolai's soul is just left with a big question mark hanging over its head. Now, this brings me to the ultimate point that I want to make in this video, okay? I have talked to Jason many times over the years, and many other creators have as well. And very often, whenever he's asked who his favourite character is, he has consistently, since Mob of the Dead / Origins time, he's consistently said Nikolai. It's been unclear as to why, he just happens to like that guy and he has a little smug smile on his face for some reason, okay? So he clearly likes Nikolai. On top of that, in Mob of the Dead, that original map where Jason took the reins, what do we hear? We hear that Weasel knows Nikolai somehow. Nikolai, why do I keep hearing that name? That's a quote in the original map that Jason made. So there's clearly some kind of significance to that character. And now he's in a unique position where, assuming the assumptions that I mentioned a minute ago are true, he is the only person who does not have his soul either in the summoning key or in the house. He's a free spirit in a very strange way. I believe that this is going to genuinely have huge ramifications for the rest of Black Ops 4. There are ciphers that have been solved over the years that say things like, when the time comes, I'm gonna have to put the needs of the many over the needs of my own. I'm gonna have to make a great sacrifice. And we've always assumed that that was referring to Richtofen. We've always assumed that on this path that only he can walk, he's just getting given all the kind of pity ciphers. But actually, maybe that's not the case. We also know that Dempsey writes a cipher in Revelations that says, cough cough, death is near, I will be joining you soon, my friends. His buds have died, and he's the last one left. So clearly there's some future in which that ends up being written, and wouldn't a perfect opportunity for that to happen be this new timeline that we've just seen emerge out of nowhere, in which suddenly Nikolai is a key protagonist in some way? It's a clear decision that has been made. Nikolai, for some reason, is going to have to either decide whether to go back to Grod to get his soul. How that's going to interface with Peter, for example, as well is really interesting, because Peter we see in Revelations, and that's a jump forward in that arc, but then Peter doesn't actually show up in the Revelations that we play, and so there's a whole bunch of questions there that, again, is a subject matter for another video. But I mean, it's just really intriguing to me that we've got all this discussion of Nikolai, and they fleshed out his character as well quite a lot in Black Ops 3. People don't really give it much attention, but Nikolai's whole family pretty much get killed. Like, this guy has a rough time. And now, for him to be our savior in some way, or him to be a protagonist, or even for him to be an antagonist, if Nikolai ends up being selfish and makes a different decision to the one he made in Grod Krovi, and decides that he doesn't want to save his soul, they can't put things right. So that is a power balance that we haven't seen before at all. Richtofen is no longer in control here, not only because future Richtofen has just muddled up his plan, but also because present Nikolai now has power that present Richtofen didn't ever anticipate future Richtofen giving him. I love Call of Duty Zombies, man. This is why I got into it in the first place. All these riddles that don't make sense that you can then start to tie together and make into this weird collage of just dirt is exactly why I love it. And hopefully I've been able to convey that to you guys in a coherent manner that makes sense in this video. I genuinely think that over the last couple of sort of zombies theory videos that I've watched in the last few days, there just hasn't been enough discussion of this point, and I've been thinking about it an awful lot since I saw the intro and saw that the new Richtofen didn't have the blood on him, and just, it puts us in a good place, man. So thanks for watching, guys. If you want more zombies storyline exploration like this, you know full well you can only get it here on this channel, so make sure you subscribed, turn on notifications by clicking the bell. I have an interview with Jason Blundell that excerpts are going to be going up from in the next couple of days, so you don't want to miss that. Man, it's good to be making zombies videos in 2018, boys. Black Ops 4 is nearly here. Alright, cheers guys, bye-bye.